up, everybody? Hope everyone's doing good. Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. He, of course, is the beautiful Robbie the Fire Bernstein. We haven't seen each other for, must be 24 hours. So it's good to see you again, my friend. It's good that you're home. I think this is the first time Rob's been home in what seems like years. So that's cool. I think you got all of 48 hours before you have to get back out on the road, right? What's your next stop?
I got a long weekend in California, Santa Monica, Hawthorne, and Agawanga. And then got a lot of stuff going on. New York City, Jacksonville, Savannah, Boston, just added a Bridgeport, Connecticut. Go to PorchStore.com. There's a ton of dates. I got 2 more long runs out on the road till Skankfest. And then finally December, we'll just stay home.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. He's having having a nice Chanukah at home. Go to porchtour.com. Of course, I'm getting done. I take December off every year. And I think literally Skankfest, we got the festival, and then me and you were doing one night in Poughkeepsie at Laugh It Up, which we always do at the end of the year. Is always a really fun time. So come on out to that comicdavesmith.com for ticket links. Great weekend in Tampa. Damn, man. I love the Tampa comedy crowds. I love Side Splitters. One of the best. 5 sold out shows. Pretty well, I think one of them had a couple tables open, but grading on a curve. 5 sold out shows and just awesome crowd. So thanks to everyone who came out and everyone at Side Splitters for a great weekend. All right, let's get into it. What number one story here, Rob, has got to be the tenuous state of the ceasefire. And what can you really say other than, man, that was quick? It's a weird thing, Rob. There's a strange dynamic being in the world that we're in. And I know you've experienced this a lot over the years. I certainly have experienced this a lot over the years. There's this tragic thing when you're like in the business of being a patriot, which means you hate your government. Like it's just, there's H.L. Mencken had that quote where he was something like, any decent, well-thinking man comes to hate the regime he lives under.
I gotta make that shirt. Patriots against the government. That's great.
Yeah, well, it is, it's real, the real dynamic. Like if you love the country, you got to be against the government because there are always corrupt regimes, but anyway, it's the point I was making is you end up, and I know you've had this experience, like you end up being vindicated quite often. It's when your priors are not trusting the government and the media, you just end up being vindicated a lot, right? And there's this thing where, like, on a personal level, we're all human beings, we're all flawed. So there is something about being vindicated where you go, see, I was right. But whenever me and you are vindicated, it's always a situation where we wish we weren't. Like you wish you weren't right about this. Like, man, that would have, look, obviously, when we were telling you for months and months that, like, I don't know about this experimental COVID vaccine, and they are making claims that none of the data, we would have liked to figure out that we were wrong and nobody ended up getting vaccine injured. And the thing actually did a great job of protecting you against COVID. And it turns out that this really was the key to ending up, like, that would have been bad. I would have taken that and looked bad rather than being vindicated and being like, oh man, this is actually much darker. And I feel kind of a similar way with this, like, obviously we were, and anyone clear thinking was just saying, like, okay, like, let's hope for the best, but this is quite likely not going to hold. And then of course you're getting, as I was getting attacked because I wasn't celebrating this thing. I told you on the last episode that Steven Crowder was coming at me for not celebrating or whatever. And I had already debunked that argument before I even realized he was using it. It's the same. But by the way, I'm not even claiming, I've said this before, not claiming coordination, but man, the Zionists sure do seem, it's like with the Democrats where they seem to get an email in the morning and then everybody is on message. It just seems that way. But anyway, this was the message the other day. And literally, so he was also claiming that I don't show up. So I said publicly, that's not true. I already said I'd do the show. I'll do it again. So I messaged back and forth with the guys, and I just went, hey, let's stop. Like, when do you record the show? what times do you record the show? And they go, we record weekdays at this time. And I went, okay, Tuesday, meaning tomorrow. Let's do it then. That's what I was trying to do. Like, let's get it over now. You're talking shit now, so let's do it right now. I do Tuesday. And they go, we can't. We got a big thing we're doing. We need like another week or two or something like that. And but the point is just that time already won the argument. We were supposed to argue about whether I should be celebrating the ceasefire or not. Like, it's already over. Time wins arguments sometimes before Steven Crowder can manage to schedule them, even when he's calling people out for not showing up to shows. So anyway, I don't even know. What are we going to argue about now that I should have been celebrating? Anyway, I wish I wasn't vindicated on this one, but it really seems to be, things seem to be deteriorating rather quickly. Israel, as of in the last 24 hours, has been heavily attacking from the air and the ground Gaza. They've killed a bunch of people. I think it was something like 60 or 70 people were killed yesterday, a bunch of innocent civilians. And so, you know, obviously this was obviously it was just ridiculous to start celebrating as if the thing was over. And I think that the people who got way out over their skis on this, and we're talking about Donald Trump deserving a Nobel Peace Prize and historic peace deals and all this stuff. I mean, it always just seemed that this is, I mean, again, I would have preferred that they ended up being vindicated, but it just seemed like that was kind of, you know, I'm not even trying to like insult, maybe wishful thinking, you could describe it as, but just doesn't seem to be what the facts on the ground are bearing out. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is The Wellness Company. And they're asking you to consider, what if those who were once called conspiracy theorists turn out to be right again? Well, a new study by Korean doctors.
Well, I wouldn't call it dead in the water yet, but there certainly was a lot of predictions that the Israelis would figure out how they could get out of this. And they already are, back to killing innocent civilians in the area. The claim is that Hamas broke the ceasefire first and was firing upon Israeli personnel. I think in order for this to last, and I hate to say this, there needs to be a little bit of grace towards Hamas. I don't understand why they would give up the hostage leverage and then instantly want to be provoking and attacking the Israelis. It seems more likely to me that it's not the actual Hamas and that it must be individuals that maybe didn't receive stand-down orders, or even more hardline terrorists than Hamas itself. But I think if Israel's actually interested in having a ceasefire, they can't kind of just jump on, like, it's Hamas. They're a chaotic organization. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Hamas isn't dumb terrorists or actually involved in this, but if Israel's interested in peace and want to move forward with this, they kind of can't instantly take every excuse to go, oh, this thing's over, we're now going to go back to killing innocent civilians. And if they are, then it's kind of channeling that they don't really have an interest in the peace deal.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think that's right. And to be like, you know, I try to be fair here. I think it's because there's a tendency on people to get into this tribal stuff or whatever. And it's interesting because with a lot of my critics, you see that, like, they almost project that onto you. Like, you know, just for example, like if a Palestinian, whoever, if a Hamas guy does something brutal, they always seem to go, oh, you sure this is the side you're defending? And you're like, no, dude, you're just getting into this tribal game and pretending I'm defending Hamas. I've never done anything close to that. And, you know, look, what can you say here? Like, Israel is claiming that Hamas violated the ceasefire, but like Hamas is claiming they didn't. And then there's reports saying that there's been like several reports that said that it was actually an unexploded, roadside weapon that was driven over. Like, who knows exactly what happened? Oftentimes you never figure out exactly what the truth was. But by the way, it certainly would not be crazy to me if I did find out that Hamas had violated the ceasefire. You do make a good point that it's like, you kind of judge based off the information you have, and you go, look, like, Israel's the one who was just taking out a negotiating team, right? They even apologized for this, right? And Hamas just turned over the last little bit of leverage that they have. So yes, it does seem like it would not follow that then they would immediately try to like, the way this thing was structured was like, Hamas has to give up their last little bit of leverage, and then Israel will decide if it wants to move back. So why on earth would Hamas give up the leverage and then, in the phase where they're counting on Israel deciding, intentionally provoke them out of it? Like, maybe there is an explanation to that, but certainly on the surface of it doesn't seem super likely. But again, as is always the case here, because I think, like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you would probably urge, like, if Palestinians in Gaza were listening to you, you would probably urge the same thing of them. Like, you'd go like, hey guys, a little bit of grace here. Like, if one IDF soldier shoots a rifle somewhere, that doesn't mean the whole thing's off, you know? And just to be clear on this is something we do know. Israel has not stopped killing Palestinians the entire time. The numbers went down. They were killing less Palestinians, you know? I think there were a couple days there where they only killed in like the dozens, which is better than many dozens. But like, that's, you know, my point is just that if you were looking for an excuse to say, hey, that's a violation of the ceasefire, it's, you could find them on either side. But again, none of that really is exactly the point. And I think, like, again, like, even if it was Hamas who violated the ceasefire, I think the point that we ultimately have to come back to, which has been my message through this whole thing, is that it's totally legitimate when you're trying to understand a conflict to put yourself in the Israeli shoes, to put yourself in the Palestinians' shoes, to try to see it from both their perspectives, and certainly understand how civilians on both sides could be led into, you know, having certain views. But that ultimately, when we're deciding what policy we support, we come back to an American's perspective, because that's what we are. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the politics of the United States of America. And so from the American perspective, we want to see this thing end. That's kind of unanimous at this point, right? Like, everybody knows this is not good. This is not, Joe Biden wanted this to end. Donald Trump wants this to end. Kamala Harris wanted it to end. Like, it's not good for us. And yet, it's a policy that we're funding, that we're supporting. And now if this ceasefire does break down, we have to go right back to supporting something that's not in our interest. And then, of course, the other thing, which I did mention, because Israel had already started down this road on our last podcast last week, but now the reaction, as I must say again, because it's just it's too important to not harp on, and it kind of gives away the whole game here of the nature of this war. But the other thing that, like, yes, as you mentioned, Rob, yes, technically the ceasefire has not been officially broken. It is, right, as you said, not dead in the water, but perhaps wounded and flopping in the water. But a major part, like the best part of the ceasefire, or tied for the best part, was the hostages being released. But the other thing that's right up there was increased aid to Gaza. And Israel's just announced that they're cutting that off. And so, like, again, it's such a blatant illustration of the way in which Israel conducts this war and the mentality that they have, that you could just go, okay, so let's say Hamas violated the ceasefire. And let's just say, possibly, Rob, that some members of Hamas violated the ceasefire, right? Like, even with a government, like with an official government, we know that every part of the government doesn't always work in coordination, and different factions have their own different, motives. But so if members of Hamas violated that, therefore Israel gets to just immediately punish the civilian population for that, and not punish them with, like, we're canceling your Netflix, or we're taking out Wi-Fi or something like that, but punish them with, like, these desperate war-torn people now don't get the aid that they need. It's just like, I think it's just very hard for anybody who's a civilized person to support that. It's, like, too horrible.
Trump's going to be in a real pickle if this thing breaks apart off of, like, small little actions by Hamas. He really needs them to do something completely atrocious that then justifies another I told you so from the Israelis to go, this is why they can't be here. But if it's just over little things that are escalating, I mean, I don't know how Trump just continues to send arms over to Israelis and not pretend like he's owned by Netanyahu.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and perhaps I think that's a very interesting question, and then perhaps an even more interesting question will be like, how do politicians into the future, how are they able to get away with this? Because like as John Mearsheimer was on, he's done a couple interviews since the ceasefire. I always think he's a very interesting person to get his take from, and he said it, and I think he's kind of right. Was that he was basically just like, look, like even if the immediate killing and dying in Gaza is paused, like, well, that's great. That's an improvement over this. But the fundamental realities on the ground, like the fundamental problems are still all there, right? And like the fundamental problem here is that, well, look, Israel's had control since 1967 of these territories. These territories have millions of people in them. Israel does not wish. Look, they'll all say it, right? Like they'll say it half. I'd say 50% at least of the debates that I've done on the Israel-Palestine issue are getting down to me just forcing the person to say the thing that they're already saying in blunt terms. Because if you ask them, if you say to any of the people who support Israel, well, how about a two-state solution? They'll give you a million reasons why you can't have a two-state solution. And then if you go, well, how about a one-state solution? They'll give you a million reasons that you can't have a one-state solution, right? You can't have a two-state solution because you can't reward Hamas with a state, and Israel can't allow their neighbors to have a government that's going to launch rockets into them. Or then they'll say, well, how come it can't be a one-state solution? Well, because it wouldn't be a Jewish state anymore, and now there'd be a majority of Arabs in the region, and they would outvote the Jews or something. But so by default, they're like, well, what is the other answer? And that's the status quo.
Brutalizing the other individuals.
Yeah, that you just rule over these people and they never have any rights of their own, that you are in control of the territory where millions of people live and they do not have citizenship or voting rights or the right to travel or trade or, anything. And so, like, if that's the ask, look, you can, obviously, me and you are always on the side of asking people to be peaceful, right? Like, if we weren't first and foremost speaking to people in America and trying to get changes in our government, or we weren't speaking to people in Israel and if the only people who could listen to us were Palestinians, like, me and you are the type of people who would be saying to them, don't be terrorists, be Gandhi. Okay, like, that's your best bet here. It's your best bet to win people over and to not get your own people slaughtered and to try to move is you got to just, like, I know it's hard, but you got to just be Gandhi. You got to just do hunger strikes and peaceful protests and all of this. And you can't blow up school buses and you can't attack innocent people because, like, it's evil and it doesn't help. Like, this is what we'd be trying to get them to do. And that you'll always try to push for that. But, like, you can also recognize that if the other side is saying to them, not that we're in a peace process where this will culminate in a Palestinian state, or not that at some point you're going to be given citizenship in the state that rules over you, but if the answer is you are to be ruled in perpetuity, you are to be slaves forever, let's just say it makes it a lot more difficult for someone to tell them to be Gandhi. When someone says that to you, you end up getting a lot more people who decide to be Hamas. I mean, it's a little oversimplistic, but it's more true than it's not. And again, it's the situation is just that, like, now you get to and of course the other thing that Mearsheimer was the point he was making was that just like the levels of Israeli control over our government have now been exposed, and people aren't going to unsee that unless it goes away or it's lowered. People are going to be aware of that. So there's major just like structural problems, because I do think in a lot of ways, what we would all like to see is we'd like to see less people dying. We'd like to see the temperature get lowered on this issue. And we'd like to see policies that are in the best interest of the United States of America implemented. And just all of those things are just major impediments to that happening. And so it was always hard to get too excited about this ceasefire because it just looked more likely than not that it would go this way. And hopefully we're wrong, and hopefully this turns around and things are better than they otherwise would have been. We'll see.
Well, yeah, Trump's in an interesting position now because He's kind of acting like project finished. It's in the hands of Witkoff and my son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And now he's back to trying to work on the Zelensky thing. And you never know with Trump. 2 years from now, we might have peace in both regions and we'll go, wow, it took him some time, but he got it done. But it does kind of feel like a little seesaw circus of going back and forth on incomplete projects.
Yeah, well, I also think that kind of one of the things that's interesting is that it seems that every time this happened, Donald Trump comes out to threaten Hamas. So he just did it again today. Said, we will annihilate you if Hamas doesn't behave. And, he had threatened them before the weekend too. And yet anyone paying attention seems to recognize that the only way we get to these points is to pressure Israel. And there's like this obvious leverage that we have over Israel that we don't like. We have to threaten to exterminate Hamas or annihilate Hamas. But to Israel, all you have to do is threaten to stop funding the thing. And it seems like that, for whatever reason, maybe it's been done privately, but it seems almost impossible to get that, publicly. Like, look, it was always when Donald Trump.
Enough, Zelensky is the same deal.
Well, yeah, but at least with Zelensky, right? That was always the immediate threat. Like from the beginning, that was always like, look, like Donald Trump threatened the crap out of Putin, and then he threatened the crap out of Zelensky. He'd threaten one side, we'll cut your funding. Oh yeah, you don't like this, we'll double their funding, which at least plausibly makes sense as a strategy for negotiating. Not that it's been overwhelmingly successful. Hopefully it is this time. But it's hard to not notice that in the situation with Israel, it just never is exactly that. Even when he's very frustrated with them, there never seems to be like a serious threat that like, well, then maybe we go our separate ways. It just doesn't seem to come. And despite that, then this was kind of interesting, was this 60 Minutes interview with Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Because what they were, and these are the president's two top men on this issue, and what they're saying seems to kind of back up that point. So,
as an aside, Jared Kushner, does he have any formal position or title with the government currently?
It's a good question. I think he's just been brought in in like this envoy capacity.
A little strange.
Yeah, well, he's also, doesn't he have like a very close relationship with the Netanyahu family? Right? I'm pretty sure I'm right about that.
That I don't know. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that he's like Netanyahu used to like visit his family a lot, and I'd have to double check on that, but pretty sure I'm right about that, which is also, maybe not the best thing for negotiation. But that's why I was actually, I was not surprised to hear some of this stuff from Steve Witkoff. I was surprised to hear some of it from Jared Kushner. But we got a few clips here, so let's go through some of this. Here's Witkoff and Kushner on 60 Minutes.
To this.
So the Israelis are on board, at least for part one of the plan. Now you go to Sharm el-Sheikh, and the whole point is to get Hamas on board. So tell us about this meeting, to set the stage.
Well, before you go to Sharm el-Sheikh, after Bibi was at the White House with President Trump, and they announced his agreement to President Trump's 20-point plan, then there was a couple of days of waiting to see what would Hamas do. And that Friday in the afternoon, we were getting word from the mediators that they were going to come out positive, but with a couple of conditions and different things that they wanted to see modified in any final agreement. But the vibe we were getting was quite positive.
Well, first, one thing I'm going to point out is that we were getting, because of our relationships, and this goes back to that conflict of interest question you had for us, but our relationships were direct with the leaders of these three countries. And we were hearing that Hamas was positive on the deal. And yet I was reading intelligence reports every day and getting briefings from the CIA 3 times a day. And those intelligence briefings were suggesting that Hamas was going to say no. And so Jared and I had to make a decision as to where we thought this was going. And both of us, we didn't need to convince one another. We really felt that this was going in a positive way. And sure enough, Hamas came out and said, we accept the president's plan. And that
All right,
allowed
so
us to...
Yeah, so that really was a very interesting admission on a few different levels, right? Because, well, okay, look, I guess the first thing that I would say about that is like, oh, okay, so let's keep in mind the timeline here, right? So that you got these other Arab countries that agree to the broad terms of this ceasefire. Netanyahu gets in there and augments them, changes them more, giving Israel more discretion over the timeline of their, partial withdrawal of Gaza. And many of us at the time saw this as potentially Bibi slipping poison pills into the deal, or, which it still looks like it might be, that it would give them an opportunity to control what a ceasefire actually means and what happens after they get the hostages back going forward. But so the fact that Hamas rather quickly in a couple days reacted positively, as they both said, to this, well, the first thing that probably comes to mind there is like, well, wait, how long were they willing to do this for? Because there's been lots of reporting that Hamas was willing to give up all of the hostages and relinquish power over like a year and a half ago. And so, like that's just a really interesting question right away that you kind of can't get around. Like, holy shit, like could we have gotten this much, much sooner with and saved so many lives? So that's a pretty big question. Also, just not had the hostages in captivity for that much longer. But then I think the second thing, which is probably even bigger, because this is just like a broader, more important topic that's very interesting. This is one of the things that's very interesting about the Trump administration. You never really got too much stuff like this out of any other administration, where he's going, well, look, the intelligence would have totally been misleading us on this. And ooh, what a coincidence. The intelligence would be misleading us. And which direction would that be in, Rob? Oh, to continue a war. That's just it's such a coincidence. That's always the direction that the intelligence seems to lead us in when it's getting it wrong, is toward a war and never away from one. Because like, look, all I'm saying is, and I don't know, I never know, Jeremy Scahill and Ryan Grimm, and there's some kind of left-wing journalists who I really respect very much, and they've been doing a lot of reporting about Hamas is saying they would accept this deal, or they're saying they would take this, and sometimes I'll be like, that's interesting. I always take it with a grain of salt, because who the hell knows what Hamas is really willing to do or not do, and they're certainly engaged in a PR battle too, so it's not like a give, but this does just seem to indicate that, yes, those guys are getting it more right than a lot of these other guys. And there's this dynamic that I've talked about many times before, which I believe it was Daniel Ellsberg who first wrote about. Daniel Ellsberg, who famously, released the Pentagon Papers, that these guys in DC, they have this dynamic where look, they get the top secret intelligence, right? And nobody else gets that. So they read it being like, I get the real stuff that nobody else gets. But then that becomes all they read. And they're not reading the newspapers, and they're not reading books about the history of the region, and they're not. And so they think they're getting the real truth, but oftentimes they're actually just being controlled by intelligence agencies. And this is why when our friend Liam did that guerrilla journalism where he's asking all the congressmen about what they think about Ben Netanyahu propping up Hamas for all these years, and they all go, I haven't seen that report. Meaning this wasn't in my intelligence brief, because that's not where the reporting was coming from. It was coming from great journalists who were figuring out what the truth is. But these guys aren't reading any of them, because that's not really their job, and they're not really concerned with that. They got a fundraiser to go to. They'll read the intelligence briefing and then feel like they know everything that's going on. And so it's just interesting. There's much bigger, broader implications of what Witkoff's saying there, but it's very interesting he's saying that. So that was kind of my takeaway from it. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Well, if your intelligence agencies are giving you information that seemingly is incorrect, you got to wonder if the intelligence agencies are just a waste of our money. If the intelligence agencies just really love war, or they particularly like this war, and so they're trying to keep everyone involved with it. Or, and this is something that you've been debating quite a few people with, if perhaps Radcliffe not specifically this, but if Radcliffe has heavy ties to Israeli intelligence, and maybe we're working with Israeli intelligence when we're coming to these conclusions. Now, I can't prove that to you, but it would certainly seem like the Israeli government was not all that interested in Witkoff's efforts here. And they were even upset the last time he got a hostage back. And then, they did try and kill the Qatar team, which we're going to play another clip soon that, seemingly Trump was rather upset about this. But you also have to wonder if the American intelligence reporting that's pushing that there is no possibility for peace here might actually be an Israeli agenda that's infiltrated our intelligence, or is just giving over that information to our intelligence. And they're going, well, our partners at the Mossad are telling us this.
Yep. And even if that's not true, it's like in effect what's happening. Right. So which is enough to be the same problem, but or the same problematic outcome. But yeah, it does make you wonder about some of that stuff. Here, let's go to the next clip.
That role was.
I mean, I just to be clear here, because you kind of can't overstate how big a deal this comment is. Like, these are, to be clear, these are the 2 point people tasked with these negotiations in the most pro-Israel administration in American history. Jared Kushner is, man, I want to look that up. Am I right about that, Jared Kushner? Here, let me look at gave up bed for Bibi. This is the story that I remember.
Rich people don't have extra beds for some house guests?
Reports indicate that when Jared Kushner was a teenager, he gave up his bedroom for a night so that Benjamin Netanyahu, a friend of the Kushner family, could sleep there while visiting. This is the story I remember reading. But whether or not he actually gave up his bed or not, just saying, that's like, this is who you've got here. You've got the envoy of the most pro-Israel president in the history of the United States of America and Jared Kushner. Like, these are not pro-Pally, college protesters, all right? And they are saying in the most diplomatic language possible. Jared Kushner is saying he felt that maybe Israel was getting a little bit out of control. You're a little bit behind the rest of us on that, but okay, yes. Yeah, we felt like that happened a little while ago, but okay, fine. Yes, perhaps a tad bit too much. But obviously, the broader implication here, and I'm sorry, but you can't downplay how damning of an indictment this is, right? Because they're saying it without saying it. Like, even when Jared Kushner is kind of saying, this might not even be in the long-term interest of Israel, is a very kind way to put it. Forgive us if that's not the number one priority to some of us. But what is the obvious comment here, Rob? Who's the impediment to peace? Who bombs negotiating teams? And who's what is this? They're saying, okay, well, like, Israel wants the war to continue. Israel doesn't want this negotiation. And that is the obvious charge here. And like, again, this isn't alleging like some secret conspiracy. You've got the two members of this administration who are best equipped to speak to this subject, who are the most incentivized to come away from it with a pro-Israeli conclusion. And even they are saying here that, like, look, put it all together. Like, yeah, the intelligence is telling us that Hamas doesn't want peace, but in practice, it's Israel who's out of control, and they're the ones who are thwarting the peace process. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Massa Chips. A lot of chips out there are not healthy, and almost all of them use seed oils, and some people don't like that. But Massa decided to do something about it. They created a tasty and delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils. These chips don't only avoid all the bad stuff, they taste incredible too. Massa is crunchier, tastier, and sturdier than other chips. Snacking on Massa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Massa, you feel satisfied, light, and energetic with no crash, bloat, or gross, sluggish feeling afterward. And that beef tallow makes the chips much more satiating, so you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterward. NASA chips are beloved by tens of thousands of customers and have been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts like Ben Greenfeld and Gary Brecka. And if you're ready to give NASA chips a try, just go to massachips.com/Dave and use the promo code Dave for 25% off your first order. That's massachips.com/Dave, code Dave for 25% off your first order. All right, let's get back into the show. What?
Certainly quite the opposite story from what we usually hear of Hamas doesn't want peace, doesn't accept Israel, and that's why we can never have peace with them. And Israel, how many times they offer them a secondary state or whatever is their talking points, and they clearly didn't want it. And now in this case, you've got the American team working on their behalf, trying to create ties and a conversation for peace. And I mean, I didn't know that it was entirely fact check that it was actually the negotiating team. I remember that reporting, but I guess this is pretty much 100% validated if Witkoff's saying, yes, that's what happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think this is overwhelmingly conclusive at this point. Yeah. Nobody's denying it. It's like whether Charlie Kirk sent that text or not. After Turning Points confirms it and Josh Hammer confirms it, you're like, I guess it's real.
I mean, and then the balls of Israel that America's having a conversation with someone to try and get something done, and America and Israel undermines that conversation while we're funding them. I mean, you would think any other country would be like, we're done with you.
Yes. Like, look, this is like what I said all the time, right? Like if you're your brother or something like that, he loses his job and he's broke and he goes, listen, man, I'm having a tough time. Like, I come stay on your couch for a few months, and you go, yeah, okay, no problem. And then like, if you come home one day and he just starts yelling at you because like you drank some of the milk and he bought the milk, you'd be like, hey, dude, you could either do the first or the second, but you can't do both, right? Like if you could either be like pissed off about like the $2 I owe you, or you can depend on me for your bills to be paid, but you can't do both of it. It's like that. Like, look, you could either take all of our help, which is again, pretty substantial, or you can undermine us when we're trying to get a deal done, but you can't do both. No country should be allowed to do both. It's just too much of an outrage for any country to be asked to accept that. And then here there was one more clip that we had that was also really worth playing. So let's jump into that and give our thoughts.
Before the hostages actually come.
There it is. There's the clip. So it looked like a nuclear bomb went off. And these people are going to have to live in tents above the ruins of them. Like, is it a genocide? No, nothing like that. Let's not go crazy. Like, whatever. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I guess there's something funny about just the, like what's being described there are like the facts on the ground. What did it look like? What was the state of Gaza? What was the reaction of the Israelis protesting when you brought up their names? And then to have to take in that information, but then spit back out the just standard thing that they know they have to say because they are members of this administration. Like, that's what it is to be one of the president's men. You don't actually get to determine what the conclusion is to this. You got to just repeat what the boss wants you to say. But it's just sad to watch them have to try to do it. Like, it's like, I guess my point is just this, Rob. So like out of just, and you watch the whole interview, but just judging off the bit that we've shown here so far. So even though like their conclusion there is it wasn't genocide and I still support Netanyahu. Okay. Who do you think this interview like helps more? A critic of Israel or a supporter of Israel? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you just looked at that whole thing, would you look at that and go, well, the conclusion was still that? Or would you go, they gave up some pretty damning information in there?
Yeah, I mean, having them not just toe the traditional party line of no, Israel's the most moral, the greatest, they've done nothing wrong. That's clearly not what's happening here. It's also just interesting to hear that someone was on the ground in Gaza and got to observe it. We still don't have a lot of direct media reporting because I don't think Israel allows for it for safety reasons. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I don't think CNN is allowed to just wander into Gaza.
No, Israel is not allowed international journalists in the whole time. I mean, there are journalists who were already embedded in Gaza, but there's international journalists have not been writing. Yes, Rob, for safety reasons.
And just admits the lies that have existed through this war. I haven't heard this much over the last 2 years, but I remember when they first started striking civilian homes, It was, well, we're letting the people know that they have to leave that location, and it's because it's a dangerous target to us because Hamas is making use of that location. As there are just as many Hamas fighters to now as there were at the start of the war, I think you're forced to come to one of two conclusions. One, they were completely lying about that, and they were just flattening civilian infrastructure and displacing people from their homes. Or two is there's no way to justify ever engaging in this behavior again because it doesn't seem to actually accomplish any goal in any capacity. And so what right do you have to, squash civilian homes if it doesn't actually, if it's not actually killing or destroying your enemy?
Yeah. Yeah. And when they say that, you go, was this a genocide? Like, no, it was a war. A war was conducted here. It's like, look, the thing about it is again, it's really hard, at least in the traditional understanding of the word war, to consider something a war when the other side doesn't have a government. Like war typically means two militaries fighting it out. And, one of the things, so I was just, by the way, I was just listening to, over this last week, Martyr Made, Daryl Cooper's Martyr Made podcast. He just put out the first episode of his World War II series, which is highly anticipated. And of course, it was excellent. I mean, it's just Daryl's gift, of storytelling and engaging with history is just unparalleled. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, I'm going to try my best to get him on the podcast soon to talk about it. But anyway, so one of the things, it starts, the first episode just came out, which is all about World War I. Because of course you can't really tell the story of World War II without at least, starting with World War I. And he's talking about doing Daryl Cooper graphic details of what trench warfare looked like in World War I. And it's powerful and it really puts you there. And it's unbelievable to think about the hell that some of these boys went through, these young kids in World War I. But like in World War I, and it's also the case in World War II, was you had these situations where like there were armies fighting each other with at least a certain degree of parity. You know what I mean? Like you could maybe call in airstrikes, but the other side could call in airstrikes too. And you have a navy, but the other side has a navy too. And you have an army, but the other side has an army too. And oftentimes it is unclear what the outcome of this war is going to be. And I don't mean unclear like the way the war in Iraq, it was unclear whether democracy would take root or whether the Shiites would be repressive to the Sunnis who had been holding them down or something like that. I mean, it was unclear it was never unclear in the war in Iraq whether Saddam's forces were going to topple the United States of America, right? But that was the situation in World War I. And like but we've been fighting these wars for so long now where it's the most powerful world empire fighting against puny third world countries where our side can call in airstrikes and our side has, Navy SEAL teams and night vision and snipers and like all this stuff that really the other side just doesn't have. And okay, but for the most part, even in those conflicts, they did have governments. When you're talking about Gaza, it's a captive people. The war is being fought by the captors against their captive population. So, again, like even if people want to if they want to argue with the word genocide, it's just like, okay, but you can also argue with the word war here. Like that doesn't exactly apply either. And so it's like, call it what you're going to call it. But like keeping in mind, like a couple facts, right? Like keeping in mind what I said earlier, that Israel just openly, this isn't like I'm alleging something. Israel's response to Gaza violating the ceasefire is to cut aid to the civilian population. That's how the war is conducted. If they do something bad, we get to collectively punish all these people. And then when you just think about, Rob, and I've heard this thrown at me quite a lot, that this isn't a genocide and the deaths are on Gaza because human shields. And the reason why Israel has to do all of this is because human shields. But then if you look and you say, well, it looks like an atom bomb went off and they destroyed the whole thing, then what are we to conclude other than the entire population is human shields? Or the entire population has Hamas weaponry hidden underneath it. And once you get to the point where you're saying, hey, the entire population is fair game, there's a word that might come to people's minds. Right? I mean, like, how do you, again, like, I hate getting into the semantics of this. There are genocide scholars, and many of them consider this a genocide, but there is division amongst them. There are some who have argued it's not. I don't want to get into the semantics of any of that. But if you're getting into the area where you say we can punish the civilian population, and in fact, we can destroy the civilian population, whatever word you want to call that, okay. Well, that's what it is. And that seems, to any normal, decent person, I think, pretty damn horrific. I don't know. Does that sound reasonable to you, Rob?
I think it's fair to say that what was done was inhumane.
Yeah, right. Let's just stick with that then, because that seems to be more than enough. One of the things that I think has been an interesting question on a lot of our minds is what, like when the ceasefire started first taking place, like, well, what if this was the end of the war, which I think we were all hoping for? If this was like the end of it, what would the political realities look like after that? Like, would that lower the temperature on this issue? And we live in such a crazy time where there's so many things going on that, like, hey, if that did calm down a bit, would other things start getting more attention? Benjamin Netanyahu himself was asked about the rise in anti-Semitism recently, and that's what he said. He said, well, when the war's over, this is all going to calm down a bit. And that might be true to some degree. But I think that most people seem to be realizing that it's going to take a little bit more than that. And I wonder if more people aren't starting to think that Netanyahu's going to have to be the fall guy for this. It's just kind of interesting. Even the way 60 Minutes lady is conducting this interview, which is really not favorable to Benjamin Netanyahu. The amount of criticism against him, the amount of people who even aren't Israel critics, but are at least going like, yeah, turning on Netanyahu. It just seems to me like maybe he's being set up here to be the fall guy. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I kind of thought at the beginning of this war that that's kind of a natural conclusion. If Israel wanted to conduct all this behavior and then wipe themselves clean of it, making Netanyahu the fall guy kind of is the way of having a pass towards engaging in doing something. I don't believe that Netanyahu actually cares enough about the country and not himself, or that this was a strategic agenda for the country that was so important that he was willing to sacrifice himself. First, I don't agree with it as a strategic agenda. But if you saw it as a strategic agenda and go, well, there's no way that we can actually get away with this. Well, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And then you guys are going to have to outcast me or whatever. But I don't think Netanyahu is going for that. And he seems to just be a powerful enough individual that he must have some cards up his sleeve to be thwarting that as the conclusion to this.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see kind of what the next moves are. And in a sense, perhaps Netanyahu's next moves might give us an indication of if it is one of those two scenarios, But there's no question that Benjamin Netanyahu himself said, when I was on Coleman Hughes' show, he asked me at one point where he said, do you think that Netanyahu's goal all along has been Greater Israel, this Greater Israel project? And I kind of said, I don't know, but he was on record just a couple weeks ago saying that the Greater Israel project is very near and dear to his heart. So that's something. But I said, what I would feel comfortable arguing is that the thwarting of a Palestinian state has been the centerpiece of his life's political work. That being said, like, he is on record saying that the Greater Israel project is a big part of his heart or something like that. I think it was a translation from Hebrew, so it's like gets a little sloppy with the turn of phrases. But obviously there's some very religious Jews in Israel who will openly tell you that that's right, that what God promised them is not just what Israel has right now, but actually is the chunk of Egypt and Jordan and a part of Iraq and a part of Lebanon and like this great. And look, I don't know, some people, seem to be very committed to that project. Obviously, the hard right wingers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Katz and some of the other guys in Benjamin Netanyahu's government have been openly talking about their plans with Gaza, which included, the Palestinians leaving. And then, of course, Donald Trump has floated out plans of the Palestinians leaving and America taking it over. And it'll just be interesting to see, like, maybe those guys are pushed to the point where they realize they got to give up on that plan. However, over the last 2 years, we've seen that they can be quite brazen, and it leads you to at least wonder that, if possibly they just feel like, as always seems to be the case, right? Like, and you can even in this like Witkoff Kushner interview, even with all that they're revealing, you kind of know that at the end of the day, if all of this negotiations fall apart and we're right back to killing, they'll come out siding with Benjamin Netanyahu, despite everything that they just said to you. And so it just kind of, you wonder if Israel is just at this point incentivized to go, we'll just keep messing this up until we can say, hey, look, there's no partner for peace again, like always. And America will come away saying it was Hamas who blew it. They were offered this deal and they blew it. And if that's the case, and those, if those hardliners have the desires that they've openly stated they do, you kind of wonder, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, the reason that why they wouldn't do that is that they'd have to read the room and go, guys, we are seriously putting our long-term interests in jeopardy here by doing this. And we have already turned the world opinion sharply against us. And we're even frustrating the Americans. And we're going a little bit too far with all of this. But like, I don't know, there just hasn't been a lot over the last 2 years that indicates to me that they are even capable of having that moment. Because if they were capable of it, wouldn't they have had that moment already by now, Like, and the fact that they haven't, I don't know, seems to indicate that maybe they're just not capable of that. That's kind of how I'm feeling. Now, that being said, I don't want to overstate that case too much because, like, for example, how there'll be like drunks who hit rock bottom and then get their life together. And you could have looked at the 3 bottoms they hit before that and been like, I mean, I don't know. He hit this he lost his marriage and he still didn't get sober. He lost his kids and he still didn't get sober. There are moments, sometimes people are just pushed far enough to hit a rock bottom and then recalculate things in their lives and make changes. So like, perhaps we will see something like that. But at the same time, it's not very confidence inspiring to see, to just see how many opportunities they've had to do that so far and haven't. I mean, like it seems to me like there's really no question that they could. Let's just say it like this, Rob. Tell me if you think this is a fair conclusion to reach. Because I was going to say, I don't want to overstate this. As sometimes I do overstate my case a little bit. Given all the information that we have, and then including the information that we got out of this interview, perhaps it's not the case that Israel could have had the hostages back and could have had a ceasefire in place and could have been moving toward the end of this conflict a long time ago. But it seems overwhelmingly conclusive that they could have pursued that and weren't, right? Like that there was at least an opportunity for that. I could it's for all the people who really used, and I mean, this literally includes every single supporter of Israel, who like used the hostages for so long as like, well, we got to do this. We got hostages in there, and think about how horrible that is. I mean, from October 8th on, there were the posters of the hostages all over New York City and stuff. And it wasn't a help wanted sign. They didn't think they were going to find him in New York City. It was to let you know, you better support this policy because of these hostages. Isn't it just such an outrage if those hostages had to be in there 1 day longer than they had to be? Like, I don't know, dude. Rob, if you were held in captivity somewhere and there were any way that I could get you out of there, I wouldn't be dragging my feet on it. I'd be like, every second would be precious. And I don't know. I mean, that just seems to be like an obvious conclusion to make here, that at least from the Israeli government, they just were not doing everything they could to get these guys out. Just that alone, is something.
Thank you. I can't go long periods of time without good snacks. So I appreciate that you
Yeah,
you're
Rob.
diligent in procuring my release.
Yeah, I've always said Rob, excellent comedian, is a great co-host on this podcast, but would not make much of a captive hostage. That's not Rob's scenario. There's going to be a lot of whining in the first few hours of that. This is all we have to eat. What is this? Hummus? That's it? Okay. But before we wrap this up, I guess there was one other thing that I want to say, and it's kind of in theme with it's just on the major theme, which has been one of the major themes of the last 2 years, is not just the inability of the pro-Israel side to play the PR game with today's dynamics. And so, because a bunch of people were saying that, it was like as soon as the ceasefire came in, they all desperately tried to like dunk on everyone else. Oh, you're not celebrating enough, or you're not saying that. So another one of the big things was that there were these images that came out of what appear to be Hamas militants kind of like lining people up and shooting them. There were in fact a few like video images of people just being straight up just killed in the middle of a field. Pretty gruesome stuff. And of course, right away, again, as if they've gotten their morning Democrats email, every single Zionist commentator who started going, look at what Hamas is doing, and look at the people dying in Israel, and where are the people who cared so much about people dying in Gaza now? And again, it's like it's just very bizarre, because you're like, you guys just can't even help yourselves. You can't even help yourself from like losing another argument. And because obviously they're trying to accuse the other side of hypocrisy. Oh, you guys say you care about people dying in Gaza, but look at this. And it's like, okay, did any of the critics of Israel say that they supported that? Also, our government's not funding it. So like, it's just a totally different thing. There's just this crazy asymmetry. But then, of course, for you, there is no asymmetry. And and the hypocrisy all falls on you. Oh, no, you all of a sudden care about innocent people dying in Gaza. Now you're the one who has a bleeding heart for the loss of life in Gaza or something like that. And like, look, I don't know. There were reports that the people being executed were accused of being collaborators with Israel. Perhaps some of them were, but I don't know. None of them have been through a goddamn fair trial. So I'm presuming all of them innocent the same way I presume the 1,700 people Israel was holding without charges are innocent. Okay. But so, yeah, that's horrible. None of us support that. So what on earth could your point possibly be? Like, I just don't know. I just felt like I had to at least address that on some level, but it just, I don't know. One more, it's almost sad in a way when you see these guys like getting excited. You're like, guys, this is going to go down just like every single other point you had. But anyway, I wanted to get on record saying that.
It's fair. It showcases some real inconsistency where all of a sudden someone else is doing killing in the area, and you guys are like, look at how horrible the area is when we're not there, and people are getting killed.
Yeah, people are getting killed when we're not there at a much lower rate. Like, okay, you win this one. All right. Anyway, we're going to wrap up there. We will catch you. Be back tomorrow with a brand new episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Catch you then. Peace. The problem. I'm very excited for this one. One of the cool things about doing what I do is I get to meet and talk to a lot of people who I really admire, who I've learned a lot from. And today's episode is a great example of that. Our guest today is Max Blumenthal, who is just one of the best authors and journalists out there. I highly recommend his stuff. His book, Goliath, is one of the best books I've ever read on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And of course, The Gray Zone, where he is a reporter and the founder, has done some of the absolute best reporting over the last 2 years on the Gaza stuff. Just really invaluable work, and particularly to me personally, I mean, I've really benefited from the work they've done. So thank you so much, Max, for taking the time and joining us.
Thank you. And thanks for that warm introduction. I hope I can live up to it. And thanks for all the interventions that you've made since October 7th.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a wild time. So I want to get into a lot of the Charlie Kirk stuff that you've been reporting on lately, but I got to ask you, just because I have you here and we're recording a day earlier, the show will be coming out on Monday, but today, Sunday, this morning, the Prime Minister of the UK announced their desire to see a Palestinian state, and then the government of Israel put out a statement about how they don't recognize this recognition. I'm just curious, because you understand this better than I do. What do you think is the significance of this? I mean, obviously, a Palestinian state will not be. We're not about to realize that anytime soon. And in fact, the destruction of Gaza continues as we speak. But how significant of a moment is this, or what are your thoughts on it?
I think it would be more significant if the European Football Association banned Israel. And it would actually have a material value if the UK and the EU got together and pressured Germany to stop all weapons shipments to Israel. That would actually possibly upend the genocide and save lives. What they're doing here is a hollow gesture to do something. It will have some diplomatic value because it will provide the Palestinian Authority with more of a voice at the UN, but it's the same Palestinian Authority that collaborates on the ground with the Israeli military. There is no Palestinian state on the ground. The West Bank now is a prison. All the cities are completely surrounded by military and settlers and military behind the settlers. And it's impossible for people in the West Bank to travel between Palestinian people, to travel between their own cities in what's known as Area A. So I don't know where this Palestinian state would be. There have been record new settlement authorizations in the West Bank. And of course, we see Israel right now, as we speak, is destroying Gaza City, which is the administrative, cultural, and governmental base of Gaza. So Gaza would have been part of a Palestinian state. But then again, how would people from the Gaza Strip get to the West Bank? And then where's East Jerusalem in this? Israel has cut off E1, which is a corridor of settlements. They're constructing in this corridor called E1. I've visited it multiple times, and it basically encircles East Jerusalem from the west. So it cuts it off from the Palestinian West Bank, and then you have the apartheid wall, which cuts that off. So there is no possibility under what Israel has done of a Palestinian state at this moment. So it's a hollow gesture. And then what is the enforcement mechanism? How can you tell the Israelis, you must allow people from East Jerusalem to go to the West Bank? They're all part of this state. They all have to be together. You must give them borders. The enforcement mechanism is what BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, was created for, which is to pressure Israel. And this is something, the S is for sanctions. So the governments could just sanction the crap out of Israel until they allow Palestinians to live as citizens in their own state. But they're not going to do that because of the internal political pressure they face in the UK from the Israel lobby, which helped get Keir Starmer to where he is, which destroyed Jeremy Corbyn, who would have actually potentially tried to enforce a Palestinian state. So what really needs to happen right now, what we need to be focused on, is saving lives. And lives can only be saved by cutting off all weapons to Israel and sanctioning Israel. Then this all ends. Then we can talk about, diplomatic paths forward. I personally favor a binational state where everyone has equal rights. But right now, we're witnessing a genocide. It's a Holocaust, and we just need to stop it. And this will not stop it. Then there's one last point to your question. This does elucidate the reality of Israel that I presented in my book, Goliath, which I know you read. Mm-hmm. And it's an Israel where there is no one, maybe a few hundred people who actually support a Palestinian state. So everyone says the problem is Netanyahu, big bad Bibi. He's always been against a Palestinian state. He has guaranteed his supporters that he will prevent a Palestinian state. But where's the furthest? Who is the figure furthest to the left of Netanyahu who still has a voice in Israeli politics? His name is Yair Golan. He comes out of, actually, I think, the Meretz party, but he has been a ferocious militarist and supporter of the genocide in Gaza. And he just issued a statement condemning the recognition of a Palestinian state. There's no one in Israeli politics who supports a Palestinian state. And even if they did, they wouldn't support it along 67 borders. So we have to deal with Israel as it is.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is the Wellness Company. We've all heard the studies. Testosterone in young men is drastically decreasing every decade. One major study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found a healthy 22-year-old in 2000 had double the testosterone of a 22-year-old in 2025. So if you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, you might want to check this out. Mars from the Wellness Company, a doctor-formulated nutraceutical designed to restore vitality without synthetic hormones or stimulants. Mars helps men to naturally increase testosterone, enhance circulation, and improve strength, focus, and sexual performance with Tongkat Ali, Tribulus, horny goatweed, yes, it's really called this, and zinc. This isn't about masculinity, it's about health. Low testosterone affects energy, motivation, fertility, muscle mass, mood, and future generations. So if you're looking for a boost, Mars will have you feeling like you are on another planet. Check them out at twc.health/problem and use the promo code PROBLEM to get 10% off plus free shipping. Again, that's twc.health/problem, promo code PROBLEM to get 10% off and free shipping. Level up your performance today. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, all of that very good points. I think that, I was always, after kind of waking up to the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I always thought of myself as a two-state solution guy. It just seemed to me to be more like of a practical sell. That, look, the Israelis are never going to accept one state because they think that means they lose their entire identity as a Jewish state. So it's an easier sell to just convince people, okay, but you can't occupy them. You got to give them their own sovereignty. And a couple of the things that have made me really re-question that, and as you said there, you think that one democratic state is a better goal to push for. Number one was when I was reading about the mindset of the Israeli leadership class around the 2005 disengagement from Gaza. And it really was the thing that spooked them, was when the Gaza leadership started pushing for a one-state solution rather than a two-state solution, because they just like that. And so that just got to me. It was like, oh, if that's what they're afraid of, then maybe that makes sense. But the other thing is really what you were getting at there, that there's just been so many. I mean, the purpose of all of these actions have been to make it impossible to ever have a two-state solution. And we're now, if you think back to like Camp David or something like that, well, it's 25 years later, and it's 25 years of putting poison pills and roadblocks in the way of even like the framework of what a two-state solution potentially during Oslo could have been. And so it does seem like the logical conclusion from that is that you're never going to get that, and the best case is to push for one state. And it is, I got to say, I'm sure you agree with me on this, but like when one of the funniest moments in American politics over the last year certainly was during that debate for the New York City mayoral Democratic primary, where they tried to, it's like how upside down the world is, that their big gotcha of Mamdani was that he said he favors one state with equal rights for all. And somehow, Max, you're supposed to hear that as like a Hitlerian statement of some kind, like equal rights, this monster. And so it does seem like maybe that's just the best thing to push for.
Yeah, I mean, and you had like black New York politicians on stage recognizing an ethno-supremacist apartheid state and attacking him for it. It's kind of like an upside down world. And one state solution, or a binational state where everyone has equality under the law, actually does represent a dismantlement of the exclusivist Jewish state. And that's not a problem with a one-state solution. It shows what the problem with the so-called Jewish state is, which is that it's an ethno-supremacist state that provides no rights to the indigenous people who actually represent a majority between the river and the sea, who have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years longer than the Jewish settler class. Zionism must be dismantled in order for peace to take root. And until that takes place, we will witness a continuous state of warfare and untold horrors like we have never seen, including waking up every day to see children who Israel defines, because they're not Jewish, as demographic threats being shredded day after day. This isn't also because Israel is because of the Jewishness of the Israeli state. It's because of the ethno-supremacist character. We had the same problem with apartheid South Africa. We had the same problem with the United States when it was a settler state, which is that until it can ethnically cleanse the indigenous population or crush their resistance, as they tried to do in South Africa, they cannot consolidate the state as a so-called democracy.
Yeah.
And this is why we see like leadership rising in Israel, like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich, but especially Ben-Gvir, because Ben-Gvir said something that he believes something that I actually agree with from another angle that's fundamental to his worldview. And this comes from his mentor, Meir Kahane, who really is, I think, the most towering figure in Israel today. We can talk about who he is, or you can just look him up. It's spelled Kahane. And what he said, what Kahane said and what Ben-Gvir says is you simply cannot have a Jewish and democratic state, which is Israel's selling point to the world. You have to choose, because if you're democratic, you're eventually going to let the Palestinians vote, and they're going to vote in their own politicians and eventually their own prime minister because they're growing. They're a demographic threat. And so we have to consolidate the Jewishness by eliminating them. And that's what Israel's decided to do in the Gaza Strip. And they're carrying out a Holocaust. I mean, they're openly saying it, that they're trying to push the population out of their homes by blowing their homes up and then driving them into Egypt. So what we're witnessing is the fundamental logic of Zionism playing out in real time.
Yeah. And well, this is what Benny Morris, I think, was saying all those years ago when he was telling the truth. And he said that transfer was always, I forget his exact words, that it was always inherent in the Zionist project. But obviously, yeah, you can only be like, it's, I think, always been the true nature of the Israeli experiment, right? Is that like they want to pay lip service to being a democracy. But the thing is, if you have these two values that are being a Jewish state and being a democracy, well, you can only achieve both of those if you're willing to ethnically cleanse the population. If you're building a state on Arab land, then you have to work out the numbers to be so that it's been around 80-20 for most of Israel's existence because they moved the rest of the Arabs out and keep them out. And so there it is. Like, you can kind of be one or the other. And it's been at this point so like ingrained in their own conception of themselves and also in their selling message to the rest of the world is, oh, we're the only democracy in the Middle East. And so in order to be able to say that, they have to keep this amount of pressure. You know, I always think back to, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it really is fascinating. If you've ever read, I'm sure you have, but if you ever read the write-up on the Israel-Palestine or on the Zionist question in the King Crane Commission after World War I, or they basically, it's not exactly perfect, but they basically get it completely right. They go, man, I mean, this idea of building a Jewish state here is going to take an enormous amount of force to create and maintain. And there's just no way you're going to do this without having a permanent state of war where the Arabs are your enemies indefinitely. And it's like, damn, if that wasn't pretty impressive to think of that in the aftermath of World War I. I mean, but I guess if you're over there, that was just the reality on the ground.
Yeah. And it was at a time of high colonialism around the world. So there were the great powers would have been supportive of this. They just wanted to be in control. And that's why the Zionist movement launched a terrorist campaign against the British Mandate authorities. But one of I think one of the other major intellectual forces who looms large in Israel today, who employed Netanyahu's father, Benjamin Milikowski, in New York, was Zev Jabotinsky, the father of revisionist Zionism. And if you read his seminal essay, The Iron Wall, which Israel's first prime minister, who was a labor Zionist, sort of more socialist-oriented Zionist, actually adopted, what Jabotinsky openly says in that essay is the native population has always resisted colonialism. Just look at what's happening in Africa. Look at the Native Americans. the Palestinian, he didn't call them Palestinians, but the Arabs will resist us as well. And the only way that we can build a Jewish state is with an iron wall of bullets and bayonets. And so many Israeli leaders, Moshe Dayan, for example, in a famous speech at the Gaza border in 1953, said the same thing. Moshe Dayan said, we cannot plow a field or build a home without the steel helmet or the automatic cannon. So this is just a straightforward colonial mentality, and it's playing out at a time when of post-colonialism throughout the world, when post-colonial countries like China are rising to global superpower status. So Israel's completely anachronistic, and they're wondering why everyone is disgusted by what they're doing. Everyone hates them, and it's because they belong to another much worse era. And the only thing holding them up is Washington and its continuous supply, its air bridge of baby buster bombs.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is why the kind of the control of the American propaganda machine has always been so important to the Zionist cause, because that's really what it comes down to. And so maybe that's a good transition into what we were going to talk about today, which of course is the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the reporting that you've done since then on what exactly the relationship between Charlie Kirk and the Israeli government and the broader kind of Israel lobby and Zionist influencer class. And this is a very interesting topic to me. I was somewhat involved in a lot of these, in the center of what the controversy was about, although I do think it was more about Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly than it was about me. But so, it seemed like that did. Although, I think for a while, there were a lot of people who were actually pretty pissed off about me being there. And I think in some ways, because I'm not nearly as big a name, particularly in like right wing or like Republican turning point type events, but I'm not nearly as big a high profile figure as Tucker Carlson or Megyn Kelly. And so me being there, I always thought was it demonstrated more of a choice on Charlie's part. Like, he didn't have to have me there. Whereas like Tucker Carlson, I mean, if you can get him at Turning Point USA, how are you not going to have the biggest right-wing voice in America there? But anyway, let me ask you like the broadest of questions that you could kind of take in whatever direction you want to. With the whole Charlie Kirk thing and the reporting that you've been doing on it, where are you right now? Like, what do you think the story is here? What do you think is important for people to understand about this?
Well, I'm working on a news story, and it's pretty much along the same lines as all the other stories I've been reporting, which is that, in the days and weeks before his death, Charlie Kirk was facing not just increasing Zionist pressure as the date approached of his first appearance on his campus-wide cross-country tour, but that actually he was bleeding Zionist donations. And I got the name of a major donor who apparently pulled out. I haven't dropped the piece yet, so I don't want to sell it out, but I just got him on the phone and he hung up on me when I asked him about it. So it seems like there's a there. And that they were pretty upset at Charlie Kirk because there's no space for allowing comic Dave Smith on stage for debate. There's no space for debate on this issue. It doesn't matter what the purpose of the debate is. There's no, it's like how they say there should be no daylight between the United States and Israel. Charlie Kirk was allowing daylight.
Right.
Everything I reported is backed up by public statements by Charlie Kirk and now by someone who had positioned himself as his personal Israeli handler. It's a guy named Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's from a group called Israel 365 Action, which is apparently funded by the Phallic family of Duty Free America, who sponsored the illegal settlement enterprise in the West Bank, real hardliners. He's also close to Regent University, which is funded by Pat Robertson. He's one of these rabbis that like his job is to groom Christians in the United States to support Israel and to support them as much as possible. I got some documents that his group had been sending to conservative influencers, offering them like free tours of Israel, biblical sites, going to Gaza, the Gaza border, etc. And he actually has given a series of interviews where he said that he was talking to Charlie Kirk almost every day leading up to his tour and giving him talking points, and that they were kind of having there was a running argument, and that Charlie Kirk, he said, was believing a lot of things he heard in the media, and that there were people close to him who were pushing him to be more anti-Israel, and that they spoke like almost like the day before his Utah Valley University fateful speech where he was horrifically killed. There were also all these Zoom meetings leading up to Charlie Kirk's final days that I learned about, including with Joshua Hammer, this really charismatic figure that you debated. I don't know how you stood up to that. Just blizzard of facts. But he's one of Netanyahu's young voices in the media, a Newsweek editor. Sean McGuire, who's emerging as sort of like this junior Bill Ackman figure, who's a venture capitalist, very close to Elon, owns a house in Israel. He was on the Zoom call. He actually deleted a tweet where he mentioned the Zoom call, which is interesting. So Charlie Kirk was just under constant pressure. And just imagine having like this cabal of representing a sort of niche movement that is giving you enormous amounts of money and offering you more in order to say what they want, just constantly calling you. Rabbi Wolicki said they were planning to set up a WhatsApp group to feed Charlie talking points throughout his tour. And they said they were very worried because people were asking him about Gaza and the genocide, and they didn't want him to go off script. But just imagine having those people in your ear all the time, just constantly managing you. And that's what this Hamptons influencer retreat was as well, that I had exposed. I broke that story. I mean, there were a lot of people there were rumors going around about it. And Bill Ackman, who's one of the biggest pro-Netanyahu money men in the country, this investor who's worth $9 billion, sort of convened the meeting in coordination with Charlie Kirk. And what Ackman's agenda was there, and I think there was a larger agenda with deeper forces that were sort of embedding themselves into TPUSA as entities like the Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire failed. What they wanted to do is basically buy impressions for Israel. So they were cultivating all of these young influencers to go to Israel, to say whatever Israel wanted. I mean, just go to the Instagram page right now of Xavier de Rousseau of PragerU, which is like an Israeli, I consider it basically an Israeli cutout. Like Marissa Straight, who runs that, is a veteran of Israel's cyber spying division, Unit 8200. And she's supposed to be like creating the next generation of America first. But go to this guy's Instagram page, like every subject. This is a young black man from Louisiana. Every subject is like Zionism, Israel. It's obvious what he's doing. He's like a paid actor. He's a talented paid actor. He's a paid actor for these Zionist billionaires. And so they were trying to groom more and like bring in like attractive women, anything that will keep the looming collapse of Israel's standing within the conservative movement from finally taking place. And where Charlie Kirk was not where we are. He was sort of, I mean, I look at him and I've been following him for 10 years. He's like a natural born political operative. And all he thinks about is politics and votes and getting out the vote in districts and networking, doing media. He's very good at it. I don't agree with anything he said, but he's good at that. And all of a sudden there's this grassroots revolt among young conservatives on Israel, and he faces the Groyper wars, and nobody's like, very few of them support it except for the Jewish conservatives, who are like only 7 or 8% of American Jews even vote Republican. So they're in the minority, but they have more money than, I mean, they command billions of dollars. So he has to answer to them and the conservative grassroots at the same time. And he's stuck in the middle in an impossible position, and he couldn't bridge the divide. And, you know, he's constantly on camera too. And sometimes he would just go off script and start saying the things he would hear from his friends and the things he was feeling. And he may have actually been disgusted by what he was seeing in Gaza. He certainly was opposed to the Iran war. And, you know, my reporting that he was actually going up in the White House and lobbying Trump and others against attacking Iran, which it was like totally forbidden. has been corroborated by J.D. Vance himself. So what really seemed to upset Charlie Kirk wasn't, though, like maybe the same things that upset us about this issue. It was that this coterie or cabal of billionaires who really seem only concerned with the fate of a foreign country was telling him what to do in his own country when he was supposed to be the face and voice of America first. And that was driving him crazy in his final days. So look at the reaction right now. I mean, look at the reaction. Candace Owens went live like a half hour after I dropped my piece and provided additional details and gave, a really stirring narrative about the influencer summit based on what she knew. And she is the target of like a tsunami of attacks, all from those very same forces. They're trying to totally destroy her. They're trying to like wipe her off the map the same way they're wiping Gaza off the map. They're overreacting because they can see the writing on the wall. Candace Owens, look at her engagement. I mean, hundreds of thousands of views when she goes live, then millions and millions more. Everyone's the conservative youth, but the whole, like, young people across the country are hanging on her every word. Nobody cares what Ben Shapiro has to say. It's all.
Yeah, well, I think that, as I've been saying for a while, I mean, I was talking about this. I did a whole show on this after I did that debate because it was such a fascinating dynamic to me. But the thing you could see was that really what separates Charlie Kirk from Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or Dave Rubin or any of these other guys was that he had to keep dealing with the young people. Like that was his whole job. And not just that he had to deal with them, but he had to keep young activists on board to volunteer. These are like the true believers, in a cause. These aren't, grand operatives. And you got to do this with a demographic where support for it. I mean, it's like, I don't know what other thing I could even compare it to. I think maybe for people who are a little bit younger, maybe you can't appreciate this because things have changed so much with like the rise of wokeism and the LGBTQ stuff. But like gay marriage, I guess I kind of, for like a while in the country, gay marriage was kind of a controversial issue. And then the pro-gay marriage side just won out. Like it just went from being like a divisive 50-50 issue to being an issue where it was like 80-20. It was like everyone's just like, dude, no one cares. Like let gay people get married. Who cares? And no, that may have changed after, the decade that followed. But, it's an issue where like young people, I mean, Megyn Kelly herself said the other day, she went, no one under 30 supports Israel. Like it's basically, it just does. So he's in this terrible place. And his whole job, like you said, is to keep the big tent going, the big tent that can win in November. But there is no tent big enough if it doesn't include Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly. I mean, like if you have to, it's one thing for him to say, I have to exclude Nick Fuentes, but to have to exclude Tucker Carlson, well, then where's there is no tent left. People like Ben Shapiro, he's removed. He's in his studio. He's still got, his backers and his operation. He doesn't have to necessarily engage with the fact that, say, on Twitter, everybody's calling him out for what the obvious, the foreign spy that he is. But Charlie Kirk had to go to these events. Yeah. So he had to find a way. And I think you could see it all over him. And I don't mean this, I'm not adding anything. I told you, I gave the audience the information I had, which is just that basically he told me, we don't actually disagree that much on this topic. But everyone could see in his public appearances, the struggle in this dynamic. And then it became this thing that like, it reinforced itself. So he would go, okay, well, I got to keep this together somehow. Maybe I moderate a debate on the subject. Then I can still present myself to my young activists as I'm the guy who's willing to have this debate.
Right.
But to the Zionist donors, that was way too far. And so now they're furious at him. And as you know well, Max, I'm sure you experienced this quite a bit in your career. I've experienced this quite a bit myself. There is some personality trait or characteristic to the ultra hardcore Zionists that for whatever reason, when you start drifting a little bit, they don't go, hey, I get your point and I see why you're asking these questions and this sure is a complicated issue. Let's come back here. When you start drifting this much, they go, you're Adolf Hitler.
Yep.
And you go, wait, what? I'm Adolf Hitler? Like, no, I'm like just drifted. And then it just has this effect of pushing a lot of people further and further. It pushes some of them to say, you know what, I am Adolf Hitler, which I don't think is the best response. But it just, and you could see Charlie was dealing with that already. It's one of the things that really backs up your reporting, I think, that really, because Bill Ackman's coming out going, no, what are you talking about? Josh Hammer, all these guys. It was the friendliest of meetings.
Yeah,
And
right.
It's like, okay, well, 48 hours later or something like that, he's on with Megyn Kelly. And like, it doesn't seem like that's the vibe that he's describing, you know?
Yeah, you should, edit in that clip right now just to illustrate your point. I mean, he was complaining about stakeholders and donors giving him less space to criticize Israel than Israelis, and he seemed just visibly agonized. This is, what Charlie Kirk is dealing with is he's a Protestant coming from a very different cultural environment than a lot of the Jewish Likudniks he was dealing with. And what they deal with is like when they're kids, if they start to question Israel, they get smacked down so hard in their own families. I was lucky, like at least my nuclear family, they're not Zionists, and they understood why I was disgusted by the whole thing. So I never faced that. And there's just it's a different culture when you grow up in like this hermetically sealed communal Jewish world. There's no space on the Israel issue unless you're like ultra Orthodox and Satmar. And so they projected that onto Charlie Kirk. And he was, from what I heard from people who knew him, was he was shocked by the way that they would speak to him, just by the rudeness of it. But that's the way they were spoken to about the issue. Yeah. And their entire identity focuses around this one pillar because, you're American, you're Jewish, it's a secular society. You're a minority, very easy to intermarry, but there's always this Israel. And that's something that you can just easily wave an Israeli flag and denounce the Palestinians, and you'll be recognized by your community as a good Jew. And if you give a lot of money, you can actually be considered a macher, like a big guy. So that's how they saw it. And I don't think Charlie Kirk fully understood that. So he was getting alienated by them. I mean, there were also these rumors that he was converting to Catholicism. Now, what I do know is he was attending, or what I have heard from people who even were in this Catholic church, was that I believe was in Phoenix, he was actually attending Catholic Mass, or he had attended Catholic Mass. So we can kind of leave it there. But if he had converted to Catholicism, that would have been a big blow to Zionism as well, because you're basically abandoning Christian Zionism and this concept of Israel as covenant land, the idea of the Jews as a chosen people to fulfill various dispensations in order to reach the day of revelation. I mean, it's all gone. So they're threatened by that. There's a lot of attacks on Candace Owens for mentioning that. But this seems to have been a reality that he was dealing with, and we'll never know where he would have landed and how it would have ended up. But had he landed in a different place, he would have lost a lot of money. And I've been hearing from a number of people I never thought I would ever meet in my life on the right, who are in right-wing media, who were kind of moved by what I wrote because it resonated with them because they were having a similar experience where they're working in right-wing or Trump-adjacent media organizations, and everything's going fine. And then all of a sudden they start questioning Israel, and their boss starts freaking out, either because the boss themselves is afraid or because the boss themselves is a Zionist. And then they realize there's someone in the office who just seems to only represent Israel, and they don't know why they're there. And, one person I can point to, just because this is played out publicly, is Tim Pool. I'm sure you've been on his show. I've been on his show. Like, I found him, I was on his show like right after October 7th, and he was pretty open-minded about the whole thing. He let me speak my mind. I didn't really feel like I was being shut down. And he gets an invitation to meet with Netanyahu, I believe, in the first of the 4 trips that Netanyahu took in recent months. And they meet at Blair House outside the White House. There's a small group of conservative influencers, and it's Chatham House rules. No one's allowed to come out of that meeting with any details. You're not allowed to say what happened. And you're meeting with someone who's like involved in the worst war crimes we have ever witnessed, who's presiding over a Holocaust. And you're not allowed to ask a tough question. And then Tim Pool goes back to his studio and no one's supposed to ask him about it. But I think someone did ask him about it on air. And like, you could see he was like a deer in the headlights. And that, you know, so basically when you get involved in conservative media, you don't know it, but you can't really, I mean, almost no one can question this because of where the money is coming from. And if you actually get involved directly, like you start going to these influencer summits with Bill Ackman, and then you take the trip to Israel and you kiss the wall and all that, it's like joining the firm. The firm, you know, the early 90s book by John Grisham, where it's like you get in a law firm, and if you leave, you know, you learn certain secrets, and if you leave, it doesn't work out too well for you. And
you know what,
Charlie Kirk was in the firm.
Dude, what happens? I gotta ask you, right? Because like I have somewhat famously never been to Israel. I did after that. I did get the invite, which I turned down. I was told this came from the top, that I was invited there. And I was like, no, I'm not going. I don't know what it is you guys do and what these you have to come to Israel trips are, but I'm not going over there. I'm not doing any of this. I've read too much about this, and I don't want to go take a picture crying in front of your wall. And I don't want to come back to my hotel and find 3 people are already inside it, or like things have been rearranged to intimidate me. Like, no, I'm not doing this. But from your understanding, and you've been there many times, what is it that they do to these guys on these trips? Why do they always want people to come to Israel? And what is it that happens on these trips?
Well, first, this is our first time talking, so I would say I would really urge you to go. Just fly in there, fly to Ben Gurion International Airport, get out and just see it as a tourist, and then go to Jerusalem, go to East Jerusalem, see how Palestinians live. You can just walk right in there. And I can tell you what bus to take from there for $2 into Ramallah, and you'll go through the apartheid wall, and then you'll be in occupied Palestinian territory, and you can just see it all for yourself. And I really recommend everyone do that. And there are various ways to make contact with local activists and NGOs, you know, even Breaking the Silence, the former Israeli soldiers, NGO will take you on a tour of occupied Hebron in the West Bank and show you what they had to do there as soldiers. And I think that's all you really need to see to understand apartheid, is to go to H2 in Hebron, which is an entire part of a Palestinian city that has been sectioned off for some of the most fanatical genocidal settlers. And Shahada Street, which goes through the middle of H2, is a Jews-only street. There are actually signs that tell you where Palestinians can walk and where Jews can walk. And you can go there and see that yourself. And you can talk to the soldiers who are there on duty. And they don't actually many of them don't like the settlers, and they're really bored and annoyed by the whole thing, but they're just following orders to participate in this genocidal project. So I think it's like, once you see that and you see apartheid for yourself, it really does give you an important authority that I think someone with your communication gifts should get. So if there's any way I can help, let me know. And everyone watching this, you should be encouraged to do that. Those who go on the AIPAC trips, which all freshman members of Congress get invited on, do not have that experience. And I personally had a similar experience because I went on Birthright Israel when I was much younger and was just starting to explore this issue, and sort of I would characterize my mentality at that point in my life when I was 22 years old as liberal Zionist. After returning, I shifted permanently against Zionism because I started paying closer attention to what was happening. The Second Intifada began, but we were like wined and dined. There was very little sleep. It was like an electrifying experience. There was so much group camaraderie. On the Birthright trip, it's also this gigantic sex vacation. They're encouraging as much sex as possible, because then you'll associate Israel with eros, with like eroticism, but also they want to encourage generational continuity, because, as Jews, we don't go and convert other people. We only multiply through procreation and marriage. And it really, like, they openly encourage you to get drunk and push you into like party spaces. I did a video about this I think it's called Ziowana for the Real News Network, where I went back and covered as a journalist a birthright mega event that Netanyahu spoke to. All the big billionaire donors were there. What's his name? Michael Steinhardt, who's one of the biggest Zionist donors in the US, told me, I said, do you want them all to get married? Is that why you're doing this? And he said, not just married, they should just do it tonight. Like get him in bed tonight. It was like sick. And then they literally push him into a nightclub setting. And like some of the soldiers are like there, like young, attractive female and male soldiers will start dancing with them. And like, I would see that take place. The last night of my birthright trip, I was like exhausted, and I woke up and like there was a knock on my door, and a young woman had just come to the door who I'd never met before. And she was just like offering herself up. And I mean, maybe some people watching this will laugh at me, but I just shut the door and went back to sleep. I woke up later that night. My roommate it was on the balcony looking out over the Dome of the Rock, getting a hand job. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And the freshman members of Congress, there's like a famous story or infamous story that I think even Politico reported, where they all got so drunk in Tiberias, at Lake Tiberias, in Tiberias, the city of Tiberias in northern Israel, that they took off their clothes, and at least one member of Congress took off his clothes. Ben Quayle, who was the son of former Vice President Dan Quayle, and jumped into the Sea of Galilee. And they just had this drunken kind of like midnight swim. That's what they're doing to them as well. And then, a lot of them are like used car salesmen from suburban Texas who could have never gone to Israel, who have these Christian Zionist biblical beliefs, and they believe, and they're taken on a free trip to see the land of the Bible. Palestinians don't even exist in their mind. Yeah. They see Muslims as terrorists. So Jim Jordan is one of them. And my friend Liam Cosgrove from Zero Hedge.
I know Liam, yeah.
He was interviewing Jim Jordan. I just was like standing next to him while he was interviewing him at this this kind of like weird conservative press gaggle where like young members of different Republican members of Congress could engage with different conservative media outlets. And I was kind of tagging along, waiting for Randy Fine to walk in. Anyway, he asked Jim Jordan about his support for Israel. And Jim Jordan says, Israel is above all other issues. It's not a political issue. It's a spiritual issue. And there's no criticism allowed. I've been there 6 times, and I'm looking forward to going again. And there is no questioning the alliance with Israel. And so that's how I think the Republican members of Congress see it. Then for the Democrats, it's like, it's becoming uncomfortable for them. A lot of them aren't going on these trips, but you have like Democrats like Wesley Bell, who are basically just paid tools of AIPAC. And if they refuse to go, they're out of Congress. Like Wesley Bell was brought into Congress specifically to destroy Cori Bush because she was taking up the mantle of the Palestinian cause. And AIPAC spent like $12 million to get this backbencher St. Louis alderman into Congress with Super Bowl style ads. And none of the ads, by the way, had anything to do with Israel. They set up these stealth packs like Americans for Democracy and Fairness. And Cori Bush voted against Joe Biden's supplemental bill on the, it's all like, and it's all that. So they just have to go. And then it's like a humiliation ritual for them where they have to go to the wall and they have to go to the Gaza border. And I mean, did you see the picture that the Democrats or various senators took with Netanyahu? Yep. And Cory Booker, you can just see his forehead behind someone because Netanyahu owns him. Cory Booker's whole career is sponsored by Zionist billionaires. And he had to be in that picture, but you could tell he didn't want to show his face. So that's the Democrats. But yeah, on these trips, the other thing that happens on these trips for lawmakers is they're all under surveillance. Like their hotel rooms are surveilled. Everything is being watched, and Israel's gathering tons of intelligence on the U.S. government through them.
Yeah, it is something. I mean, it's, part of the dynamic with all of this is just that now that kind of the corporate media has just been, kind of destroyed in the marketplace, like and as particularly young people are just not getting their news from corporate media outlets. It's almost there's this interesting dynamic where Israel, the Israeli lobby, it was always like the third rail of American politics. But once you get into this new decentralized media and they don't have that control and you're just allowed to talk about this, and even some people could argue against it, it's just too bizarre for people to not see it. Like, it's so freaking weird. I mean, I remember even being struck by, so I was reading your piece, or was it your piece or was someone else at the Gray Zone? I think it was yours, but where you were, it was a piece about Charlie Kirk and the meeting in the Hamptons, and you ran a picture of the guy who you just mentioned. I'm sorry,
Xavier DeRousseau.
Yes, him, and it was, and one of the girls who it's
Emily Wilson.
Is it Emily? Yeah, I think I debated her on Pierce Morgan once, which was like. I literally, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think her big thing to me, we were like debating on Pierce Morgan, and I might be confusing her with someone else, but I think it was her. And she was like, well, Egypt occupied Gaza and Jordan occupied the West Bank, and I don't hear you criticizing them. Why is that? And I was like, well, primarily because it ended in 1967. And she was like, okay. Like, it's just like the most just ridiculous guy. But anyway, so there's a picture of the two of them, and it's them that they post online in Bridgehampton at the time of this meeting, which, for people who don't know, I think is about a half hour away from East Hampton. It's like another one of those fancy schmancy towns. And they're like at this posh hotel, and they're kind of taking these glamour shots. And even just that, I'm like, what is this? Like, what is this? I thought, are you in the business of, like, we talk about politics? Like, do you have deep convictions about issues of policy that you believe in because you have like a worldview and principles, or are you like an Instagram 20-year-old chick taking like bikini pictures? Like, what? Like I'm just saying, like, like when I go to, like, I got a lot of friends, in broadly speaking, our camp in this world. If I go to Austin, Texas, like I might meet up with Scott Horton and grab a steak, but like, we're going to grab dinner and talk. We're not like, let's go take pictures of us posing outside. Like, it's just seems like such a bizarre thing. There's like this bizarre cultural dynamic amongst the crazy pro-Zionists influencers. It's like they're just like in a different world playing a different game than those of us who are just talking about issues that matter.
Well, it's creepy. I mean, they're actors. They sort of were like, a lot of them were basically on Bill Ackman's casting couch. And they have no principles. They're vapid. And, some of them, I feel sorry for them because they're coming from a lot less privilege. And therefore, this is like a big opportunity for them to move up in class by getting basically Jewish billionaire money to shill for Israel. That's where the black influencers come in. And there is a major component of this. Wealthy, right-wing, racist Jews buying black people to do their bidding. Bill Ackman was part of a WhatsApp group of 50. It sounds like an anti-Semitic conspiracy, or like something, a film commissioned by Joseph Goebbels. But Bill Ackman was part of a WhatsApp group of 50 Zionist billionaires who were planning basically operations after October 7th to stop student activism, specifically at Columbia University, against the genocide. And one of their major action items on their agenda was paying black personalities, public figures, to do what they wanted, to speak against Palestine solidarity activism. And so that's why you see such a disproportionate number of black influencers at that Hampton summit, along with the attractive women that they can get there. Emily Wilson was previously critical of Israel. She said so publicly. Like, there are tweets screenshotting what she said before Bill Ackman got to her. Afterwards, she was on her way to Israel to kiss the wall, and Xavier DeRousseau was sent to a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or I would call them Gaza Holocaust Facilitator aid hub in Gaza, where he mocked the population, for starving and claimed that Hamas was eating all the ramen, and that's why Hamas leaders were taking Ozempic. And I mean, that's what he was being paid to do. So this is the future of pro-Israel media. It's just basically prostitutes being paid by Zionist billionaires. And why are they doing it? They're afraid that white and black Christian men from military communities, basically communities where the military is one of the only options to be able to pay for college or move up in class. And so they join in very high numbers. Also Latino males who voted for Trump in record numbers, that they will not support Israel and therefore they will not fight Israel's wars. And so they need to keep them mobilized and motivated. Once they start questioning a ground war in Iran, that could be a big problem. So, I mean, that's the long-term agenda here. And it's all paid for. It's all bought and paid for, which alienates people and it fuels anti-Semitism. It really looks like some kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy playing out. It's not good for the Jews. We're like 3% of the population. And you have this billionaire class that so many Jews I know despise. I hate them.
Yeah.
And they are basically ruling through fear, intimidation, manipulation, and bribery against the wishes of a majority, increasingly a majority of the population. And like we're being used as Jews, all Jews, as a human shield for them and for Netanyahu.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you can't, it's amazing to watch it play out too. And that there's not, like I hear from, say, people in the Jewish community who are not exactly thrilled with my views on Israel or some of the stuff I've publicly said over the last few years. And they'll talk, they'll talk about the threat of anti-Semitism and the spike in anti-Semitism over the last couple years. And I'll just say, I'll be like, okay, so just even from your worldview, do you think that's a coincidence that it's spiked in the last 2 years? Like, might this have something to do with what Israel is doing to these poor, helpless, captive people? Like, I mean, how can you defend? These are people who don't have an army to defend them, don't have a state of their own, that they've been denied by the Israeli government, and now you're just slaughtering them. I mean, how can you and it's almost just out of self-preservation, you would think, that like so many of these Jews would wake up and go, oh yeah, this is going to like, it's some sick self-fulfilling prophecy where, yeah, you are actually going to create a situation where it's unsafe for Jewish people. And you've already created a situation that's very unsafe for the Palestinians. Like, what are we doing here? So let me say, phrase it like this. So, because I do think something like, to me, with the Charlie Kirk thing, there's almost like, there's three areas that I'd kind of separate here, where there's the really interesting stuff that we've been talking about, which is like, what exactly was going on with Charlie Kirk? Like, where was he in the, look, Charlie Kirk, like I said on my show the other day, I said, at the very least, he wasn't Ben Shapiro. People are acting like he was just Ben Shapiro and that's it. And it's like, well, Ben Shapiro ain't hosting me and moderating a debate between me and someone else. He's not hosting Tucker and Megyn Kelly. So like, clearly there was this battle. So that's a very interesting component, particularly because, the Netanyahu and they're all trying to use his death already. And so if they want to play that card, it's like, well, let's actually have a very interesting discussion about what it was like to be someone who was trying to corral young people and toe the Zionist line over this the last few months. Then there's also which, I'm sure both of us will talk about going forward. It's like how this is going to be weaponized and used. And I'm not just talking about like the Jimmy Kimmel stuff, but I'm talking about Pam Bondi talking about how this is proof we need to fight hate speech at like anti-Semitism, like AKA the pro-Palestinian left-wingers now need to be cracked down on. So we'll see what happens with that. But then there's the other component of it, which I do want to ask you about before we're out of time, which is just the actual assassination itself. Now, I have been battling a bit even with my own audience at time here, where I've been just saying for the whole week that like a lot of people are jumping on this Israel did it theory. And I'm like, look, guys, there really just is no evidence for this. And we don't want to all come off like kooks and kind of, like partially just on the face of it, I don't want to promote something that's untrue. I don't want people to believe something that's not true. And then right after that, you're like, guys, let's not discredit the entire critical of Israel movement by doing what it seems to me that a majority of the internet is doing, which is just jumping on this thing because that's the conclusion they prefer. But then there is also another component, which is like there are some legitimate questions about the actual event, which are like, I've had a few different things that have raised my eyebrows while reading it. So in terms of the actual assassination, I know you said in your article there's no evidence to suggest Israel is behind this. What are your thoughts on that, the people who are jumping on board with that conspiracy, and anything that is an oddity to you about the actual assassination?
Well, yeah, I've said that in multiple interviews too, that I don't have any evidence of an Israeli government or Israeli role in Charlie Kirk's killing. I stick to the facts. That's why I'm still here. The reason that this resonates, the idea that Israel played a role resonates, is Netanyahu himself and Israel in general maintain power through lying, manipulation, intimidation, and assassination, especially assassination. And Netanyahu rose to power after the killing of Yitzhak Rabin, his main political rival, and Leah Rabin, Rabin's wife, said Netanyahu incited his murder. Netanyahu marched in front of a mock coffin that said Rabin on it just days before the murder. I mean, and then Netanyahu's coalition partners, Ben Gvir, et cetera, they are like the spiritual heirs of Yigal Amir, who assassinated Rabin. So this is like Netanyahu's MO. He just tried to assassinate the entire negotiating team of Hamas inside a U.S. ally. And Israel has global assassination squads. But, what they would have done and what they were planning to do, and you could already see Laura Loomer rolling out the campaign, was to character assassinate Charlie Kirk if he continued to go off message. Yep. That's what they do. That's what they did to me. And, if I got like an op-ed in the New York Times, not that I would want to, they would try to destroy my reputation. That's what they're doing to Candace Owens. Like, I don't believe they're going to send a sniper to take out Candace Owens, but I hope she has good security because, they want to inspire some vigilante or something, but it's not like the Mossad's MO to go inside a U.S. ally and do this. At the same time, there's another reason why people are spinning out their own theories. And I don't want to attack these people, actually. Like, I think, people should be asking questions. We are not witnessing a credible investigation into Charlie Kirk's killing. Starting with the text messages, the exchange between this shooter, Tyler Robinson, and his supposed furry trans lover, roommate, they read like something written by a 65-year-old federal law enforcement officer.
That is true.
And the words being used are something I've never heard 22-year-old people using, even as a Gen Xer when I was 22. Nobody said, I'm going to retrieve the weapon from the vehicle and leave it at the drop point. Andrew Colvett yesterday declaring that there's no exit wound because Charlie Kirk had a spine of steel. That doesn't inspire confidence. He's told that by the ER doctor. And shouldn't the ER doctor be telling the media, or the FBI should be telling the media that that's why there's no exit wound? Why are we learning that from basically the spokesman for Charlie Kirk?
It also was like it did have a very like Ghost of Kiev type feel to the story. Like, I'm sure that makes some people feel nice, but could we get back to what's plausibly real and not just like these made up stories? But yes, I agree.
Now we're hearing it was a World War I era, I guess Mauser rifle, and therefore it didn't have a serial number. Unusual. The removal of the camera from behind Charlie Kirk. Again, this is like what people are talking about. This is what the internet's talking about. I'm not just like trying to present to you the theory of the crime. But a staffer for TPUSA removed a camera that was filming behind Charlie Kirk, which would provide a lot of, I think, visual context on where the shot came from, and remove the SD cards. And Andrew Colvett goes out and says he did the right thing in the middle of a crime scene to remove the SD cards. And the FBI has the footage, but he's someone who loved Charlie Kirk. I don't know what the FBI is saying about this. There are so many other odd issues here. The photo of Tyler Robinson at the Dairy Queen 15 minutes after the shooting, the comments by federal law enforcement that Tyler Robinson took 1 minute on the roof to carry out this operation, which I think would be difficult to do even for a professional sniper. And the jerking of Charlie Kirk's head, I guess he's according to the official version is he's hit from the front on the left side of his neck, but his head jerks that way. And so many people are formulating the theory that he was actually shot from behind to his right. And so we're at a point where anyone who's paying attention, who's paying close attention, who isn't like invested in the TPUSA MAGA franchise is not going to believe the official story at this point. And there have just been so many failures on the part of Kash Patel and the FBI as well. So the theories are going to continue to abound, and some of them will focus on Israel. And it really doesn't help to have Netanyahu go out twice, first on Newsmax, which is a vehicle for Israeli influence, taking money from the Israeli foreign ministry, and then on his own personal prime minister channel to deny killing Charlie Kirk. Like, when have you ever seen a foreign leader just on his own voluntarily deny killing a major U.S. public figure? It's just a little weird.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, that there is no question that's right, and there even for someone like me who's been saying, like, hey, we really shouldn't jump to conclusions, and there's no evidence Israel was actually involved in the assassination. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't admit that I do in some way think that they deserve this presumption of guilt that they're getting. And I do think you're absolutely right, particularly coming off of the heels of, which, by the way, ironically was the topic that got all these Zionist donors so mad at Charlie Kirk at the event, was that Megyn and Tucker were talking about the Trump administration burying the Epstein stuff. And off the heels of that cover up, it's like this administration, this FBI, this Justice Department just have no credibility amongst, their voters, that if Israel was involved in this, nobody has confidence that they would actually get to the bottom of it and tell the truth. Look, to be clear, I don't think any of us should jump to any conclusions. And like you said, sticking to the facts, that's the best course of action here.
Can I make one other point?
Sure. Absolutely. Let me just quickly say that I certainly am not telling anybody to stop asking questions or to stop investigating or to stop being suspicious. So that's always healthy. But yes, final point to you, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah. I mean, feel free to do your own research. Well, I would accept that Tyler Robinson could have done this alone, and that he could have been motivated by Charlie Kirk's anti-trans commentary, that this was some kind of trans shooting. Like there could have been a component of mental illness there as well. I can accept that. But does that mean that Tyler Robinson is a leftist? If he was on some of these weird nihilistic Discord channels, which are themselves penetrated or at least surveilled by federal law enforcement, was he a leftist or was he a Democrat or a progressive? If they could show that he was at No Kings rallies holding up signs like calling Trump a pedophile or something, then I'd be like, all right, well, there it is. And like, the No Kings rallies went too far, run with it. But the narrative is already set. The narrative is and this is what the Trump administration has been trying to do all along, is keep the United States in a perpetual state of emergency in order to expand the power of the executive and the surveillance state and Palantir to surveil us, control us, and consolidate the power of his very narrow sectarian movement. And this is the perfect opportunity for them to do it. And we have to be very aware of what's going on and question not just the official story, but who Tyler Robinson really was. Because when Charlie Kirk was shot at Utah Valley University, he was being protested by a group of progressive students. One was holding up a sign that said Free Palestine. Another one had like a pro-LGBTQ sign. Another had a sign, maybe denouncing Charlie Kirk's comments on race or something. And they were interviewed by a pro-Trump videographer. I just watched this. I'll tweet the video out later. And he was challenging them. And they said, and they said that we don't hate anyone here. We still love them. We just disagree with them and think they're being misled. Then he starts challenging them on Palestine and Hamas. They condemned political violence immediately. They said, we just don't think like, we just are like, we want to debate this. That's really like the progressive left, as I understand it. They're not really going to get on a roof with a sniper rifle and settle things that way. They're waiting for the next midterm election.
Yeah.
And that's who is being implicated as the killers here. We're talking about like 50% of the country. That's who Trump is implicated. And they want this civil war. They want to pit us against each other because what does Palantir's CEO, Alex Karp, describe as his business model? It's preventing social unrest from affecting or disrupting the lives of the 1% who sponsors him. That's what he openly says. So let's be level-headed here. Let's not get carried away, and let's be strategic. The most threatening thing right now is unity against those forces of surveillance, of apartheid, of genocide, of authoritarian control of the United States, and the profiting from surveillance that Palantir represents. So I think that's another reason why it's important to question not just the official story, but the direction that this assassination is being taken. And it's also why it's so why someone like Candace Owens is so threatening to the right, is because she's making it more difficult for them to just simply pin this on the left conveniently and then take away our civil liberties.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And that's always their go-to.
I mean, the Democrats would do it too if like someone had, shot Biden, they would have shut down Elon's Twitter X,
Yeah. But the truth is that, every day Sean Hannity says the far left Nancy Pelosi or whatever. And then that's supposed to mean 50% of the country is the left and the other 50% is the right, as if they're all the same thing, as if Hillary Clinton and your liberal mom and some 20-year-old gender studies major are all the same thing or something, when really the dynamic is always that Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are the same thing, and that actually they're your enemy and your fellow countrymen are not. And they always want to make it so that you think your fellow countrymen are your enemy, so that you don't focus on the fact that it's actually them. And it's like you said, the constant state of war, perpetual emergency, and perpetual support for Israel, which all seem to somewhat be interrelated.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a strategy of tension that is taking hold right now. And I think, we're in the double digits in this country of people who just are done with the duopoly, the corporate duopoly, and are willing to put aside the culture war to actually have real change and basically unite against the 0.1% and the war state. But we don't have a vehicle, and we're basically not allowed to run in either party. So we're just kind of out here in our podcast world.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But at the very least, we've been given more of a level playing field than ever. And part of the dynamic that we were talking about there with Charlie Kirk and the young people is that us, and I say this very broadly, but we've just been kicking their ass in the general debate. And I mean, that's just the bottom line. Like, we just keep winning and they keep losing, and support keeps because they're defending the indefensible. And once it's just like there's a reason why they rely on censorship and propaganda, because their ideas can't really stand up. But listen, we won
in the marketplace of ideas. We won, so they're going to call it all hate speech,
right? Yeah,
and and then leaving the only avenue, political violence. So I mean, we just want to debate.
Yes, 100%. Max, thank you so much. Please, if you guys weren't already familiar with his work, make sure to go check out Max Blumenthal. Anything specific that you want to promote? You said you're going to have a new piece on this out soon.
Well, if you follow Dave Smith, then you probably have some overlap with me, and you'll hear about it soon. So, the Gray Zone. Subscribe to us on subscribe to us on YouTube or Substack, and you'll find out about it.